Race relations are at a very strained place in our country. Probably the most strained they've been since the 1960s.
How do we talk about race and diversity in this polarized climate?
This is our attempt.
We spoke with students and lifelong Hazelwood residents.
We talked to local businesses and clergy.
We spoke with victims of the justice system, and we spoke with people who are part of the justice system.
We even sat down and talked amongst ourselves.
We had one simple question that we started with. Are race relations worse or better, and why do you think that way?
Through the following conversations, it is our hope that you will begin to have similar conversations with the people you encounter in your daily life.
And maybe our different experiences can enrich our shared experiences.
All right, here we are again for our next diversity dialogue, Hazelwood Diversity Dialogue. And today we have with us Homer and Ursula Craig, Homer is a lifelong Hazelwood resident, and Ursula, his wife, almost lifelong, but she started her life somewhere else, and we'll talk about that as we get into our dialogue. But first of all, let me thank you all for taking the time to spend with us to have this dialogue. As you know, we are telling a Hazelwood story here, and we feel like it's important for Hazelwood people to tell the Hazelwood story. For many years, the media has been telling our story, but we like to tell it ourselves. And our dialogue has been around, issues of race and race relations over the years, how you've seen it then as you were growing up, how you see it now, how you've gone through the transition. And we want to talk to you all about some of those things. Now, you all have a very unique situation between you because one is born in Germany and one was born here in America.
And guess which is which?
We're gonna let you all tell the people. But so we think you bring a very unique perspective to the conversation, and so we are looking forward to hearing from both of you. So let's just take just a few minutes to just kind of introduce and talk to us about where who you are, where you came from, and just a little bit about how you grew up in the communities that you grew up in when you were younger. So we're going to start with...
Defer to my wife, ladies first.
We're going to start with Ursula.
Okay, what do you want to know? I'm born in Germany in 1941. I lived in Germany until I was 23 years old, and I came to the United States. My upbringing was very unique. I come from a very poor background. As soon as it was right after the war, my mother did her best to make sure that we had a house and food whenever. I know a lot of times we didn't have no shoes in the wintertime. I started school in the wintertime without shoes. I went barefooted to kindergarten in a couple of inches of snow. And as I grew up, I made myself a promise that my kids and myself would not live like my mama had to live, especially since my, I say it nicely, father came from a very rich family. But he never gave us anything, so we had to go out and work, eat out of garbage cans, bring food home, or go do housework for our rich family. So we could go buy some coffee for my mother. So it was hard, but we learned a lot. So, and I was fortunate enough to go to a Catholic school, went to a convent for a couple of years. I learned a lot. And then when I decided to stop, I came home. I got married for a short time, had a son, my son Johnny, and then a couple of a little bit after I met my good husband, Homer.
Okay, let's stop there because we got to find out from Homer kind of how all of that took
Okay.
place. So Homer, here we go.
Ask your questions, I'll answer the best of my
Well, just
ability.
tell us a little bit about how you grew up and what it was like growing up in Hazelwood back in those days.
Actually, I was unique in that I was fortunate. My mother and father were both home in the same house and raised me together. And I was smart enough to be thankful for it because a lot of my friends, there was no father in the house. My parents wanted me to have a better life than they had. My mother had to drop out of school in the 6th grade to raise her brothers and sisters because my grandmother became a widow and she had to work. So my mother literally raised her brothers and sisters. My father ran away from home when he was 12 years old. They were both born in the South. And for whatever reason, my father ran away from home. He did pretty good for himself for a country boy. He worked on railroads, coal mines. He made a promise to God that he kept. He was in a mine explosion and trapped in a mine, and he told God if he got out, he wouldn't go back in. He kept that promise. He also, along the way, working on railroads, he got a junior college education in Prince George County, Maryland, which is sort of good for any young black man in those days in the 1920s. And he didn't get in any kind of trouble. My mother and father were both original founders of Wesley Center AME Zion Church in the Hill that still stands today. Reverend Grayson's the pastor there now. My mother and father wanted me to be educated. I could read when I started kindergarten, and I was 3 years old. I had my own library. I had Longfellow, I had the Song of Hiawatha, and classics, Moby Dick, some Poe. My mother taught me how to read, not the Pittsburgh Public Schools. I didn't encounter any prejudice in Hazelwood that adversely affect me. In fact, I was real fortunate. Like I said, I could read and write. And when I was about, my first encounter with overt prejudice was when I was about 11 or 12 years old. I won a contest that was run by the Post-Gazette. And my prize was a trip to Washington, D.C., the capital of our country. And I was the only black child there. When we got to Washington, D.C., the people running it told me I couldn't stay in the hotel with the other kids. That was my first negative impression with racism in the capital of our country.
How did you handle that?
I'll tell you how I handled it in a good way, but it wasn't me. It was the other kids, every one of those kids, and they were all Caucasian. That's why there's no hatred in my I could have went a lot of ways. But those kids all stood up and said, if he can't stay in this hotel, then we won't stay. And they stayed in the black hotel with me. And I gotta be honest. The impression I got was that if all the old white people were gone, the world would be a better place. Because the kids, they didn't have the prejudice. It was the old people. I had to get grown to find out the prejudice is, it has no color, it has no sex.
It's taught, it's learned.
It's learned.
Yeah.
In fact, Nelson Mandela said that children are not born with prejudice, they're taught it.
So you both kind of grew up around the same time. You're nearly around the same age, I guess. Mm-hmm. And
I'm older.
And okay, and so it would be interesting to hear some of the specifics around your life, Ursula, especially because as you were coming up, during the aftermath of the Hitler regime, and you were dealing with some of the residual effects of that. And I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about what that was like, how that impacted people in your community, you yourself, your family.
Well, as far as I really cannot remember too much, but my sister reminded me a lot of it. Right after, say, like 43, 44, it was pretty hard to live in Germany because Hitler still had that big input, which is coming back today.
Here,
And it's coming back big time.
here it is.
And in Germany.
Go ahead, Ursula.
So-
Don't let Homer throw you off.
So as far as my mother go, is mainly my biggest thing was not so much Hitler, it was more the French soldiers who came to my house and wanted to kill my mother because she protected my brother. So that's where I had a little bit problem in really, how can I say it? It's almost like prejudice. I had a lot of dislike for French people. And as my sister said, the Hitler part was going a long time because we had a lot of the young Nazis still living in the neighborhood. And they tried to persuade you or they spied on you. Say like the black soldiers came and brought us food and they turned us in. So a lot of the black soldiers got punished because they brought us food. So, and I made myself a promise growing up there, Hitler or no Hitler, I will never hate anybody the way these kids were taught to hate their own people. Their own people. And I learned a lot about white soldiers, white American soldiers, how they were hateful to the German kids. Very, very hateful. And sometimes I think about it and it takes all my strength to look at some of them. I was married to a white soldier and he tried to tell me that all black folks were bad. And I wasn't going for that. So, and that's why I told my son when he understood and Homer came around the house and Homer taught him, was teaching him good things, you know, there is no such thing as hate. That's mostly my impression I have. And it's like my sisters, we talk about it sometimes. And she says it's getting very bad in Germany, like when she remembers more. But I remember some when she talked how hateful people were and still believe in Hitler.
So let's turn over to Homer here. Homer, you know, you were coming up during the time when Truman was president. And as you know, Truman it was under his administration that we began to see a lot of housing developments in places that were more isolated from the commonwealth. You know, you were coming up during that time. There may be some other things that you might be able to talk about during those times.
I can.
That you experienced.
Truman was a good man in my eyes, and he led to the integration of the military. Prior to that, there were people who should have known better. They had no sense of history, and I'll name one, Douglas MacArthur. He ain't no hero to me. Douglas MacArthur was the son of Arthur MacArthur. Both of them are graduates of West Point, and they wanted to keep the services segregated, okay? Now, they should have known better, because if they knew their military history, they would know that the first man to die for America was Crispus Attucks, a 6'5" slave. He wasn't hard to spot. That's why he was the first target. And I also knew, like I said, my mother and father bought me books. I knew that the first battle of the Revolution was not at Bunker Hill. It was at Breed's Hill, which is 300 yards away from Bunker Hill. But Bunker Hill was to Breeze Hill like Pittsburgh is to Homestead.
So what was it like growing up during that time?
That's what I'm going to tell you. President Truman, you mentioned him. Truman integrated the troops, but the majority.
But you weren't in the troops then. You were
I was
growing
in the
up.
National Guard. I
When
lied about
Truman,
my age.
okay, so you need to go back a little further then.
Yeah.
You need to go back to, let me
Korea.
see. You need to go back
Korea.
to Roosevelt, right?
Yeah.
Go back to
The
Roosevelt.
second or third term of his.
Yeah.
But Roosevelt, I was too young to really remember. But I want to concentrate on Truman because what Truman did, he integrated the troops, okay? But the American public wasn't ready for it. So what he did, they were integrated when they left these shores. But when they hit Korea, Truman said that the reason they had to immigrate the troops was because of the losses of the troops that were in Korea. So he was forced to. He wasn't forced to. He was ahead of his time. He was ahead of his time. I've always been interested in prejudice and prejudice within the troops. And it's interesting to me because I went in as an enlisted man, but I come out as a chief warrant officer, and I ran units in Germany. And my exec officer was a lieutenant who technically outranked me, and I had a sergeant named Sergeant Feeney. When this lieutenant's wife come in, we were introduced as Mr. Craig and Sergeant Feeney. And his wife turned to me and said, "Pleased to meet you, Sergeant Feeney," because she assumed that I was a subordinate. I was the guy in charge. I was the guy in charge. So like I said, my experiences were unique.
Yeah, you had some unique experiences,
Yeah,
Homer.
I did the first physical security survey on the Usera stockade. That's the biggest stockade in Europe. I made some predictions and nobody listened to me, and the first escape was made right where I said it would be made. I worked the first SOFA, which is an international agreement. SOFA stands for Status of Forces Agreement. And I worked with the German government, the French government, and the American government.
So tell me this, Homer. Why don't we start with you this time? How did you meet Ursula? How did that happen?
I was at Turley Barracks, and I saw her, and I was attracted to her, and I walked up to her and stuck my finger in her face and said, you're going to marry me. By the way, what's your name and where do you live? She gave me a phony name and a phony address, and I asked her for a date, and she gave me a date, which didn't turn out to be phony. So on the time of the date, there was a knock on the door. She came to the door, and there I was. There I was, and we've been together ever since, over 50 years.
Now you tell your version of that, Ursula.
My version was almost the same. The only thing, I did not care much for police officers. And Homer was, he worked at certain
I did
things.
special jobs.
He did special jobs. And therefore, I did not want to talk to him because I really didn't like police officers. So after a while, he started talking to me, and finally I told him where I lived, which he already knew because in Germany, everybody carries an ID.
King card is called.
From the day they're born, they carry an ID. If I move from here to here, you have to report to the police. And he worked with the German police, so he knew everything about me. So even though I was lying to him where I was or where I lived, he found the place.
So tell us about what it was like to be a interracial couple in Germany.
There was no problem in Germany.
No
problem
problem
at all. We were accepted right away because there were a lot of interracial couples in Germany. You know, it's like I said before, a lot of the soldiers came back over and stayed in Germany. Like Home and I, we had planned to go back over there. We had an apartment waiting and everything, but his parents got sick, so we stayed here. But in Germany, there was no problem. Everywhere we went, Homer was accepted, I was accepted. He came to my work, I went to his work. Whatever happened there, he straightened out with his people who worked for him, you know. They liked it or didn't like it, it made no difference. He told them what to do.
So tell me about the transition, Homer, from Germany here, as you all transitioned your family from Germany back to America. What was that like?
Well, my parents, like I said, were born and spent their early life in the South. And when I got orders to go south, they didn't want me to take my family. And I explained, and I love my parents, I explained gently and respectfully that if I could go across the water and risk my life for some people that I didn't know and wasn't socially, well, but I was. But if I could risk my life for them, I could go anywhere in this country I wanted to. And that's what I did. And I took my family, and I encountered, what was that racist? The Senator, Jesse
Helms.
Jesse Helms. Yeah, he was a radio disc jockey when we were down in North Carolina, and he spewed hatred. His hatred spewed out of his ears. He was so deep into it. But he wasn't the only one. He wasn't the only one. But the people that I interacted with, I had no difficulty with them. I had the Crabtrees. They were Caucasian family, born and raised in Mississippi. But as long as they respected me, I respected them. And we stayed in contact even after I come back to Pittsburgh. Billy White, another guy from, and he was white, another guy from Mississippi. We were like that. And the squad leader that I interacted with, he used to think it was funny to call me Billy White and call Billy Homer, you know, until we interacted, and then he stopped interacting with me.
So what was it like when you all got back to America?
One other thing I gotta I gotta tell you. When I was down in Kentucky, I had a sergeant who shall be nameless for obvious reasons, and I was doing things that my company commander, regimental commander, battalion commander liked. So he had to bring me food while the rest of the troops were out in the field. And he told me, he said, Craig, if I ever get a hold of your rectal orifice, it belongs to me. And he finished the statement with, you know, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. He told me this. At the time, I was a corporal. The next time he saw me, I was running the outfit he was assigned to in Germany. And when he come into the unit, I said, oh, how you doing, Sergeant so-and-so? I said, you're still a sergeant. And he wanted to forget about the Klan thing, but I reminded him he was a member of the Klan. But you know what I did to him? Treated him like the rest of my soldiers. He did his job, and I gave him recognition for what he did. Why did I do this? Because I wasn't the same as him. I was better. I was better than him, because if he had had the reverse, he would have worked me into the ground. But I was more of a man than he was because I treated him like a man that he was.
So tell me about the transition. We're going to go back to Ursula.
Yeah.
Tell me about what it was like to come back here and live in Hazelwood as an interracial couple.
Well, my husband, he prepared me for before we got married. He told me all about the racism and everything. And he said, it's like a lot of these guys tell the girls over there, we have gold on the street in the United States. So he prepared me, and I was prepared. We moved to North Carolina. I didn't have no problems. I loved North Carolina until I came to Pittsburgh and my kids got called out their names. That's the first racial
Who called them out their name?
Hold on.
The first racial incident we had when they called my kids out of their name. And that's how I experienced how much racism was in Hazelwood at the time.
It wasn't a Hazelwood person. It
It
was a
wasn't.
teacher.
It was a Hazelwood person who called your son out of his name. I know it was in front of the house.
Keep going.
So And then we had the same problem. A teacher at Gladstone, Mr. Miller, he called my kids an Oreo. My daughter Pat came home and told me what he said. I called the principal, he didn't do anything. I went up to the school, the principal said, don't do nothing, I handle it. He did not have to handle it. I handled it for him.
How did you handle it?
I knocked him out. First I talked to him.
Physically?
Yeah.
I physically knocked him out. First I talked to him, I say, because somebody say, John Craig, Pat Craig, and another kid said they're brother and sister. He said, they cannot be brother and sister. He's white and she's black.
Only he didn't say black. He used the N
He
word.
used the words. So when I went up there, I tried to talk to him. He would not listen to me, and I was mad. When I get mad, I cry. And when I was finished with him, I didn't cry no more. And they said, we're going to call the police. I said, call them. Call number 2 station, ask for the kid's father. So the whole thing was gone. And I did not run into that person again until about 20 years ago at Alderdice.
Tell me this, Ursula. What kind of conversations did you have with your children around this kind of thing?
You know what? Actually, I personally did not have a lot of conversations about them unless they came home and said certain things. Then we both sat them down. I never did it by myself because he could explain better than I could at the time.
What did you say to them, Homer? When you were trying to prepare your children for what they would have to deal with, what were you saying to them? How did you prepare them?
Well, that's two different things. The way I prepared them, my sons and my daughters, we would run from Hazelwood, and my wife, we would run from Hazelwood to Shinley Park, do a mile around the oval, and then run back home. They were in physical shape. Remember when they had the president's physical thing? All 4 of my kids were top in their class. When my youngest son went into the Marines, he was the top Marine in his cycle. He got promoted in boot camp. So I raised them like soldiers. They were in good shape. We studied, again, my kids and my wife, under Master Flewellen. Ted Flewellen was my art was jujitsu, and my karate I took in Germany with the German police. My oldest daughter, when she was in Japan for 13 years, she continued karate there. So their art was Aikido, Jiu-Jitsu, and karate. My daughters could handle themselves. My wife sort of skipped when my son was called out of his name. My oldest daughter was told not to turn loose of the guy that called him out of his name because she was hanging him out the second floor window of Gladstone. So my girls could take care of themselves. We had an incident where a guy had raped a girl, and he had done time for it, and he got out, and he made the mistake of grabbing my oldest daughter. I think after she beat his butt, she threw him through a plate glass window. I know he got 250-some stitches.
So you've established the fact that you prepared your children
Exactly.
physically.
Physically and mentally.
But mentally.
Not to take no crap from nobody.
Okay. So, but what did you, from a
I
thinking
explained to them-
standpoint?
I explained to them that there were ignorant people, and you couldn't tell ignorant people by what they looked like. I explained to them that there were good people everywhere, but watch out for the bad ones and don't take no crap from them. I know it's not the Christian thing to say turn the other cheek, but I only got 2 cheeks. I don't have 77. I don't have 77, and it worked for me.
So turn the other cheek means turn the other person's cheek.
That's the way it worked for me. That's the way it worked for me.
So okay. So as we move forward, what we have here, what you all have here, is a African American man and a white German
Female.
That came together and got married.
Caucasian,
And
I
you left
prefer.
Germany and you moved here to Hazelwood. Now, can you talk a little bit about differences that you see, if you see any differences? So differences from when you were a younger couple to where you are now. If you see progress from the standpoint of a positive moving forward progress, or do you see that we haven't moved forward at all? I mean, how do you see things?
I think we moved somewhat forward, but not enough. I feel that when we first came, Hazelwood was a lot more positive than it is now. That's my opinion. You know, people cared more for one another than they do now. There were not as much, it's not hatred, it's ignorance.
Yes,
You
that's
know,
the best word.
a lot of people don't understand that doesn't matter what color you are, as long as you treat people as people and don't think that you're better than the rest. In my opinion,
Or you don't think you're lesser than the rest.
or lesser. I mean, I've been doing volunteer work for over 40 years, and it's been very satisfying. And I met a lot of people, and I met a lot of positive people. There were not a lot of negative, except some of the young folks, they have to understand just because you're white or you're black or whatnot, as long as you have a dialogue with one another, you get along, and I might not say what I really want
You
to
said
say,
it right.
but I feel I have a lot of positive experiences in Hazelwood, and our kids wanted us to move, but we don't want to move. I like Hazelwood
So you feel like things have gotten worse
in some situations.
in our community. Do you think it has anything to do with the direction of our country?
Yes,
Absolutely, especially the last year or so.
yes.
It's,
It-
it took me 50 years to become a citizen. And the reason I became a citizen, and I'm glad I did now, was because of Barack Obama. If it hadn't been for him, I would not become a citizen because I saw a lot of positive.
And I can tell you, when I was raised in the 40s and 50s, I wasn't raised to be prejudiced. And the best example of this is my mother. On our street, when I was growing up, there was black and whites. And there was a white lady that lived up the street who, again, shall be nameless, but she had an alcoholic husband. And every time he'd get paid, he'd come home drunk and beat her up. She would run to my mother's house, well, my mother and father's house, because my mother would protect her. She was white, her husband was white, but he didn't dare cross my mother's threshold because she would have interacted with him. And this is where the lady came. So I wasn't raised to think I was better or worse, but I was raised to try to stand up for the underdog.
Right.
And that happened in fact, I'd forgotten some things. That happened in Gladstone. There was a Caucasian boy that was skinny, underweight, and the others would pick on him. And I would intercede and interact until they stopped picking on him. And I had forgotten about it until my 50th reunion, and his sister come up and told Ursula about my interactions. But no, I never hesitated to interact if there was a need to interact.
Homer, what do you see particularly as the differences between, say, when you and Ursula were younger, you know, just moving back to Hazelwood, and now? What do you see in terms of the differences?
I'll tell you why. Because even now, although they're older in their 80s and things, there's still friendship and understanding between people of different races. Now, I'm 78 years old. There's a friend of mine that went to Gladstone with me. She lives in Greenfield. She's an educated lady. She was a teacher for years. She would always invite Arlene Childs, who's a black girl. Arlene's dead now. You might have known her. Yeah. And me to Isley's. It was just 5 years ago I told her why we never went. She didn't know it. Isley's was racist and prejudiced as hell. And I said hell, the H-E-double-L. And we could go in there and buy food, but we couldn't sit down and eat. But the fact is that every white person was not aware of that racism. My friend was not aware of the racism, and she lived right here on Flyers. Her mother, her brothers, in fact, I still talk to her brother. He lives in the suburbs. They were not racist at all. All white people were not racist. All black people were not racist. But the ones that were, the negative black people were pointed out, and some white people were encouraged to be racist.
So when you think about, when you consider the high volume, the high number, high percentage of African American males that are in prison in this country, do you think that's a result of racism?
I think it's just us and not justice. Yes, it is racism. It is racism. I'll give you a good example on 2nd Avenue. If my son, especially my black son, stole a car, what would happen to him? He would go to jail or some kind of incarceration. However, if you go out to where Central Auto Body is, the reason there's a new facade there is relatively new. It's about 30 years. I'll tell you exactly why. Because some white boys from the South Side, South Hills, not South Side, stole a car, lost control, and took out the front of Central Auto Body. But instead of going to jail, their parents paid to put that new facade and the extra bay on there. Okay, there ain't no jail, there ain't no police record of it anywhere because they didn't go to jail. Mm-hmm. So that's racism. Mm-hmm. Plain and simple, that's racism.
Well, so now
if you do something and I do something, it won't. I'm assuming Doug is Caucasian, right? Correct. Okay. The three of us could do something, and I've seen this. I could take all three of you in, but you would be turned loose. You would be turned over to your parents, and he and I would be in juvenile court, including the chief of police son. So like I said, I've seen it. So yeah.
So now I need you to elaborate a little more, because you're speaking from
experience,
the perspective of both a citizen, but also a retired police officer.
Police sergeant.
Okay, police sergeant. Yeah. So talk a little bit about that, because you've seen the justice system from both sides of the fence.
Right. And it's not justice, it's just us.
And is it worse or is it better now?
I've been retired since 11:30 a.m. on the 31st of August, 1994. So maybe it's changed, but it wasn't good when I was there. Mm-hmm. It wasn't good when I was there.
Well, it's interesting, because as we talk to you both, you have some differences in how you've seen the world, then and now, and
the lenses are different.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's also interesting that, the perspective that you bring as a retired police officer, also military police. I believe you were military police as well, right?
I did sort of that kind of stuff.
I think I got your hat. So, but that, it's very interesting.
And that's another thing, because people now, I'm gregarious, and I have a lot of friends all over the city, and they don't all look like me. And for 20 years, I was a part of an organization in North Hills, and everybody treated me nicely. But then somebody got killed at the Civic Arena, and I was sort of attached to the person on the hood of the car that did the shooting. And that was on the front page of the Post-Gazette. All of a sudden, the people that I had been knowing for years, I was just that old guy, all of a sudden, they looked at you differently because they thought I was a teacher, which I have taught. I have taught in schools, but they never thought I was a policeman because I didn't talk like a policeman. I didn't act like one. I don't know how they're supposed to act, but they thought I was
So
a teacher.
let me ask you both to do something for us. If you could leave a message for our young millennials that are coming up and the next generation that's coming up, what would that be?
I'll let her go first because I know exactly what
Oh,
I
I know what I want to say. I tell the young folks today, get a good education. It's very important. And always follow your dreams. Don't follow the bad folks. Just follow your own dreams, what you want to do. You don't have to leave Hazelwood to be somebody. You always can stay in your own community, be somebody, and help the next person that comes after you.
And I would echo that. Education is the key. When, and I say my people, black people, okay? When they couldn't get into colleges and things, the mothers, the fathers, the grandparents, they did everything they could to educate their kids. Nowadays, our kids, black and white, cheat themselves. They cheat themselves. Their education is paid for, and yet they don't take advantage of it. When I say that, I don't mean all of them because my wife and I are in contact with a person that we've known since they were 7 years old, a person of color from Pittsburgh who went to school, who got their education, and they were fought for. First, Lucent Technology fought for them to take them away from AT&T, and then Hewlett-Packard wanted them so badly that they made them a vice president of Hewlett-Packard, the computer company. This is a black person that was born and raised in Pittsburgh who lost their father at an early age, who had a good mother that did the best that she could under the circumstances for that child. So, and when I used to teach down at St. Stephen's, whenever she would come in, because she has a base in the South, whenever she would come into town, she would talk to our kids and tell them how to present themselves for a job, how to dress for the job, how to conduct themselves. So to me, the biggest cheats today are our kids themselves because they don't realize what they have in their hands. They have their own future in their hands, and some of them allow other people to control their destiny. You must, and I'm speaking to the kids now, you must control your own destiny. It doesn't make you better or worse than anybody else, but it makes you responsible. And that's what, if I could get anything across to the kids, it would be responsible for yourself. Don't ask nobody else to take care of you. Take care of yourself. And if you got something left over, sort of help somebody else to take care of themselves.
Ursula, can you sign us off in German?
Ja, was soll ich danach sagen? Wir hatten eine ganz schöne Zeit hier. Der Reverend
We have
hat
a
uns
pretty
so viel
place here.
gefragt. Und ich hoffe, was wir gesagt haben, war alles gut. Auf Wiedersehen.
We hope what
Auf
was said was
Wiedersehen.
good. And goodbye.